Hey, everybody. So this week we are wrapping up this topic of social institutions and social issues with our final subtopic underneath this. And this one is violence and criminalization. So there's a lot, again, that the authors in some of the articles that we're going to be reading, that they begin to kind of expose us to. And again, just for the purpose of getting us to begin thinking about what we're thinking about as it pertains to this particular issue of violence and criminalization. Now, there is a supplemental video that I'm including in the module that I'm hoping that you all will go ahead and watch. And this video is called Justice and Privilege. And when you watch that video, it's not very long. It's probably about 10 minutes. But when you watch that video, you'll begin to pull some information from that video as it relates to the content of some of the articles that you're going to be reading. All right. All right, y'all. So let's get into this. The first article that we are going to be reading is by Victor Rijos. And the title of that article is Policed, Punished, Dehumanized, the Reality of Young Men of Color Living in America. Right off the bat. The title of this article should kind of bring to your attention issues that we have been dealing with for many years when we're talking about young men of color and the criminal justice system. You know, the names that may pop into your mind: George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, some of the victims, folks who have been victims of police brutality. So the purpose of this article, what the author shares with us, again, is this whole concept and this idea of a police, I should say, sanctioned police violence, and looking at how law enforcement may respond to young men of color. And so, whether I should say young men or all men of color. And so this author is kind of begins to delve into and talk about this concept that some may not have a full understanding of. And it's the concept of social incapacitation. Now, I need you to think about that phrase for a little bit. Social incapacitation. And what does that mean to you? What do you think it would mean to anyone? When we consider, again, social incapacitation as it pertains to men of color, dealing with, having interaction with law enforcement, some of the things that come into mind, just that word incapacitation gives us this idea or this thought that one is not able to live a life according to what their desires may be, according to what's going to help them feel like they are able to be productive members of society. Because I always have to be watchful, always got to be mindful, always got to keep my eyes in the back of my head, that type of perspective. So that's what this author is going to be exploring in this article. And now with that being said, oh my goodness, if I can get my words together. If you recall, a few weeks ago, I shared with you the clip from the movie The Hate U Give. And I encouraged you to watch that movie. And again, if you have a streaming service, a movie streaming service that would have that movie on it, again, I encourage you to watch that movie because it does give you, again, additional information that's going to coincide with some of the content of these articles. I am going to post a link in the module, and it's going to be probably for like the first 10 minutes of the movie. So at least it'll give you an idea of the context of a movie. But again, if you have a streaming service that you could search that for the movie, the title of the movie again is The Hate U Give, then that'll be great. You can go ahead and watch that movie in its entirety. No, it's not required, y'all, but it's good movie. It's a good movie to help you pull some additional content and understanding to the articles that we're reading. All right, the second article that we're going to read is entitled The Myth of Immigrant Criminality and the Paradox of Assimilation. Yeah, this one, I'm going to tell you right now, off the top, this one hits deep, simply because now I need you to think back, of what the thought process is for yourself, for your, maybe going back the first generation, 2 generations, your parents and your grandparents, when we just throw the date out, September 11th, 2001. and then the word immigrant. And what begins to be the thought process when we're considering what took place on September 11th, 2001, the attack on the World Trade Center, on the Pentagon, the plane going down in, I just forgot the place. Shanksville. Okay, thank you for whoever yelled that out. But when we consider the events that took place on September 11th, and we hear that word immigrant, it's unfortunate that within our culture, in our society today, that some folks would begin to associate the word immigrant with criminals, with criminality. I'm going to get it out, y'all. I'm going to get it right one of these days. And like I said, it's unfortunate because immigrants do not equate to, an immigrant does not equate to being a criminal. And so one of the things that this author talks about are some of the other factors that relate to criminality, or that relate to an increase in crime, when actually there's been a decrease in criminal activity. But he talks about, these two contributing authors talk about different things that contribute to the idea of criminality. And one of the things that might not be too surprising is the issue of high school dropout, or high school incompletion. So again, this is all about making sure we kind of get clear understanding on what we begin to associate, or how we associate that date, September 11th, 2001, to that word immigrant. Okay, so the third article that we're going to be reading this week is entitled, and this has, again, multiple contributing authors. This article is entitled Refugees, Race, and Gender: The Multiple Discrimination Against Refugee Women. Now, this article, just as other articles we've read in the past relating to women and women's issues, this article is full of information based on intersectionality of several different areas, I should say. First, with nationality, with the idea of a woman who is fleeing her country as a refugee and seeking solace. We have nationality, we have gender, and then we also have socioeconomic status. All of these different intersectionalities coming together when we're talking about just women who are seeking refuge with their children. One of the things that the writer talks about, or that the authors talk about in this article, is just the statistics on women and children that make up a refugee population. And one of the things that was very surprising to me is that what they had documented was that 80% of a refugee population is comprised of women and children. And that's a pretty significant number, a significant percentage. And then we have to think about, what are some of the dangers, what are some of the hazards, some of the obstacles, some of the struggles that women refugees may face. When we're talking about this from an intersectional perspective, we also have to be mindful of, again, this cultural expectation that women may have for themselves, but then also the way that other cultures may view women. And when I'm speaking about other cultures, I mean, of course, as we're talking about refugees, women, female refugees, of course, are not going to still be in their country and in a living within a culture that is familiar to them. So when we consider that, we have to ask ourselves, what are the expectations of women, female refugees, and the way that they need to conduct themselves, carry themselves, how they are labeled. One of the things that the authors talk about in this article, unfortunately, is while internationally there is knowledge of wrongdoing, of domestic violence, of human trafficking, of sexual crimes being committed against women refugees, unfortunately, internationally, there is no law and no policy to protect these women. So what does that mean? And where does that leave us? Those are questions and topics that this author is going to be exploring in that article. Now, our final article that we're going to be reading this week is by Natalie Sokoloff, And I'm just going to give you the very beginning of the title of this article. This article is entitled The Intersectional Paradigm and Alternative Vision to Stopping Domestic Violence. Again, we're talking about domestic violence from an intersectional perspective. So we're not just looking at race and gender, but we got to throw in there socially, the social inequalities of social class. And what does that mean when we're talking about working with immigrant women of color and their fight for equality and for legal protection when we're talking about ending domestic violence? Again, this is another article that delves into some of the issues that immigrant women face. And unfortunately, as I said previously, with us being in a society where we're still struggling with how do we work with immigrant women? Unfortunately, through the legal system, there is often a colorblind perspective. And that colorblind perspective kind of basically, it looks at things from a larger social structure and how the different elements that impact a person's life, how they may feed into whether or not we're going to buy into your claim of being the victim of domestic violence. And when I talk about the social structures, again, we're looking at education, economics, we're looking at housing, all of these different structures. And how does that impact, again, whether law enforcement is going to respond based on what we think is appropriate? We meaning society as a whole. When it comes down to addressing domestic violence and offering societal protection for immigrant women of color. All right, so these are the 4 articles that we're going to be reading this week. Again, there's going to be the supplemental article, the supplemental video that is going to be in the module entitled Justice and Privilege. There will also be the link for, again, like the first 10 minutes of the movie, The Hate U Give. And I really encourage you guys, if you have the opportunity, to watch that movie in its entirety. All right. With that being said, I'll see you guys on the discussion post. I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease. I'm out. Woo-hoo.